meeting of the Wilson Science and Technology Forum. In my view, what we're doing might be constituted as a learning exercise. We're all trying to understand some issues that are really important to the public in general and to us. So, for example, last year we had talks on climate-related issues. We heard from Hugh Wright, we heard from Carrie Emanuel from MIT, we heard from Dick Blinzen from MIT. In fact, Carrie and Dick debated a bit, and I think we all have opinions on what we heard from those gentlemen, and they've provided us with enough information to inform our thinking. And that's what I'm trying to make sure we do, to provide enough information about technology that affects our lives so that we can make informed decisions as we go forward. This year, we're focused more on the electric grid. And we heard from Eric Johnson last time. He is from ISO New England. In coming weeks, we're going to hear from Zainab Maghravi from HEAT, the Home Energy Efficiency Team, which is in Massachusetts. We're going to hear from Chris Niddle, a professor at MIT Sloan School, who's going to talk with us about some policy issues associated with cost of electricity and other topics. We're going to hear from Senator Michael Barrett, who's going to talk with us about siting of electrical facilities in the Commonwealth. And there will be other people. We're going to hear from some folks early in 2024 about geothermal energy. We're going to hear about energy alternatives and alternatives to fossil fuels. So this season, at least into the early part of the winter, is very much focused on energy generation, transmission, and the issues associated with the grid. Now, we're not going to solve all the problems. That's not our goal. Our goal is to provide us with an understanding. And I think we've got a group of speakers who provide us with that kind of ammunition, let's say. Now, today is a day for us to have a conversation internally among the forum members. And the thought here that Walter and I had is to provide an opportunity for us to think about what we want to ask or hear from our speakers going forward. What are the issues that are of major concern to us? Now, I can't think of a better person to lead this conversation than Walter Hubbard. We all know Walter has been operating a computer consultancy business in town. We all know him for that and appreciate what he does. But if you look at Walter's history, he started out with Stone and Webster. He's done work with General Electric, all of this in nuclear electric generation and other aspects of electricity generation. He's literally, since he was a student in college, he has been a student of the grid. And I can't think of anyone among us who could better chair and host and lead this conversation than Walter Hubbard. So Walter's going to talk today. We and I thought we might subtitle this "Solutions to the Grid," the light at the end of the tunnel. So you see that in the announcement of the meeting today. But Walter, I'm going to turn the floor to you, and we are recording, so we'll have a good record of what we talked about today. Walter, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ron, and nice to see everyone here. I actually got my start in solar electricity back when I was 12 years old, 1963. So it tells you how old I am. I did a science fair project with a photovoltaic, and I tell you, my science teacher just could not understand about how we were generating electricity with this photocell. So we've come a long way since then. And so my background was in design and operation of both fossil and nuclear power plants. And having worked in those plants, especially the fossil plants with coal dust going everywhere. I worked at the largest coal-fired plant in the world back in Detroit. And I was just amazed at the complexity. And I said, there's got to be a better way. So back in 1980, I left the generation of electricity to get an MBA and specialize in uh, uh, alternative energies. And so at University of Michigan, I got my MBA. I took courses in energy economics and in solar engineering. And back in 1980, my solar engineering professor on the first day, when he stood up in front of the class, he said, "Well, we all know about global warming." And I looked around. Yeah. Oh, sure. I know about that. No, I didn't know anything about that because now we know the effects of global warming when we have uh, hurricanes that are stronger than ever. There's wildfires around the world. So we need to do a better job of affecting climate change. And so the I think we all need to look at this on our personal lives as well. So so what can we do about it? Now, today's discussion is going to revolve around the grid. Now, I am no expert on the grid or the present day economics of the grid, but this is just going to be a presentation, and it's going to be open mic. So feel free to interrupt so that we can come up with a list of questions of our future speakers in the next few weeks. So, so I wonder if we can get into that right now. I'm going to share my screen. I put together a little PowerPoint presentation, and let's see. Am I sharing that? Did that share? Yeah,
Yep.
you guys can see it, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Okay. So again, this is going to be open mic. Jump in anytime you want. All right. So we're going to talk about security, availability, and reliability and what we can do about it. All right. Um, and so we've got, um, uh, so first thing to be concerned about is security of the grid. Um, and it could be in the form of a cyber attack. Now, our guest speaker a couple of weeks ago said, as far as the ISO is concerned, they feel that they are secure and protected. Now, I don't know about Eversource, so we haven't heard from Eversource, but then we never know. Of course, everyone feels that they're secure against cyber attacks. But also other forms of, I know this sounds crazy, but there's also a concern about how we often have in our own homes or in workplace, we have Internet of Things, where, for example, my new oven at home is connected to the internet. So someone came up with the possibility, oh, okay, we got to turn all the ovens on and turn all these devices on. And so we're going to bring down the grid that way, to overload the grid. I think that's far-fetched, but still a concern. So cyber, and then the other thing is about physical attacks. Now, which was actually a big concern of mine and big concern to the substations down in North Carolina last year, in Washington State, in Oregon, where some crazies took an AR-15 and shot up the transformers and put that local area off the grid. So, so, so I'm concerned about physical attacks. We know our power plants are pretty well protected, but the substations weren't. So I took a walk around the Horn Pond substation. So that's a pretty large substation. And I thought I was just going to find open to the world, but no, there's actually looks like about a foot thick concrete wall around the transformers. So it looks like it's pretty new. So it looks like it's been put in in the past year. And looking at Google Maps at a couple of other substations, the one in Wakefield in particular, that looks like it's protected as well. So it
Walter,
looks like the utilities.
Walter,
What's that?
are you talking about the station at Horn Pond or what, where did you walk around?
Yeah, the station at Horn Pond, right.
Ah,
Um,
you just said something I hadn't even noticed. You're saying there's a 4-foot concrete wall around it. Is that
no,
right?
no, 1 foot thick. It looks like it's about a foot thick.
Oh,
It's
okay.
probably 20 feet high, and it's only around the transformers. It's not
Ah, I
around the
see.
other
I
switchgear.
see. I see.
And so, because the switchgear is not that vulnerable, but
Yeah.
but the transformers are, especially the oil tanks that are on it. So,
Now,
so
let me ask another question about cyber
yeah,
attacks. What
yeah.
is it that protects that facility from cyber? Do you have any idea?
No, I have no idea.
And
No.
what would you do if you were in a position to try to protect that facility from a cyber attack?
Yeah, I don't think that facility would be so much, but certainly the ISO New England,
Yeah,
that's located in Springfield or Westfield.
yeah.
That's certainly a concern. They have offsite as well um, that they can switch to. But on the other hand, so that is concerned, and you know, you may kind of put that off saying, "Oh, that's not going to happen," but we all know that uh, the the pipeline. I forget which company
Colonial,
it was, but it was brought down about 2 years ago and
Colonial.
affected gas
Walter,
stations.
yeah.
Yeah, Eddie.
Walter, what exactly makes the grid vulnerable to cyber attack? What exactly is the uh, functions of the software, if you will, that actually enables that kind of vulnerability? Do you have an idea?
No, I don't, but I think we can learn from the attack that both Israel and the U.S. Did to the Iranian nuclear processing facilities, where the it turns out there was some compressors that were attacked with some software, and that shut them down. And so, okay, well, good. Um, but on the other hand, maybe that same software can shut down components in a power plant itself.
Are there
Or
microcontrollers
yeah,
for
sure, yeah,
example,
that's right.
monitor the well, the trouble is it's really control functions that you would be most worried about. So phasing in, for example, of the power grid, if they're DC-DC converters, DC-AC converters, inverters,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
functioning. That's the thing I'm a little puzzled about, is exactly what are the vulnerabilities, and I haven't too much of an idea at all about that.
No, and I think that's an important point. I doubt
Well,
very much that the general public has any understanding that. But
Right.
Walter, is it not fair to say that if there are electronics controlling the operations of such a facility, they're at risk?
Yeah, right. It's all on the internet. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not on public
I,
internet. Sure.
there
Yeah.
was discussion about this by IEEE, and the fact that we have connections between various islands of electricity.
Yeah.
If you can foul up what they're seeing is being generated from somewhere else to you
Yeah.
since that's on software, and that can if you can do a real sophisticated attack if you do that.
Yeah.
I think we're all old enough to remember the Northeast blackout in 1966. I do because I was going to school and I had a test the next day. And we didn't even know how to spell cyber attack back then. And that, so you still have that possibility of a normal overload or whatever you want to call it, different thing that could still bring the grid down like it did in 1966.
Yeah. That's a good point, Bob. Something I don't have on here. And I think that was the switchgear connecting Canada to upstate
Yeah,
New York.
yeah.
See, I know that in that Hydro-Quebec, for example, used it largely for monitoring purposes. And that was years and years ago. So if you're monitoring, there must be some control aspect to it. That's where the vulnerability comes in.
Yeah.
But I don't understand that control part. That's where I'm lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think my suspicion is that we don't hear much about this in detail because it just arms people who want to create mischief if they know too much about this. But when you think about this, Bob Deering, looking back from 1966 when we had an overload issue, today we have so much electronics involved in both electric generation and in electric transmission distribution. And it doesn't take much to realize that if their electronics is controlling the operations of a nuclear power plant or the distribution in terms of stations, that all it takes is somebody who really wants to create havoc to get into those, and they can do it. We may not know how to do it, but we know people are smart enough to figure it out. We got a couple of hands up. Let's go to John first, and then we got 3 hands up. Let's go to John.
Okay, I just want to say that I was just amazed just now. I put my hand up physically, and Zoom detected that and put up my hand virtually.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
Yeah, that's real interesting. I'd never seen that before. Okay, so I just want to point out Eric Johnson last time from ISO New England said that currently ISO New England controls the grid in New England, that their internal systems are not connected to the internet. So that's one of the major forms of cybersecurity they have, that you just can't be on the internet and get into their systems. But I wanted to say another thing is that with renewables, controlling the grid is getting more and more complicated. Without renewables, it's like they're guys there and they see the control panel and they send a message to this power plant, hey, start up because we're going to need more power, like in real time. But with renewables, it's going to get more and more complicated, and it's going to get more and more controlled by AI. So it's going to be electronic. And as that happens, I think then the cybersecurity threat becomes greater, because
a good point.
Control is going to be by electronics much more than by people.
Let's go to Tom. Let's go to Tom. We have a couple of hands up, Walter. Let's take the hands. Tom?
Okay, Tom.
Okay, yeah. So the other thing that you have to think about with cyber is also, I guess, what you might call the disgruntled employee approach. There was an attack actually on a water system in Australia by a number of years ago by a disgruntled employee, who overwhelmed the sewage system he was fired but still had access to certain things. And there was the Iranian issue was not technically cyber in a sense. It was a USB drive somebody picked up. So you got to be careful about, also when you think cyber, also think about these attacks that are either internal or caused by what they call social engineering, where some employee internally causes it. So when we think about security, it's not just big walls around everything. It's also controlling what you can do from inside, and that's more complicated the more complicated your system gets.
Good point. Let's see, Michael.
Well, I certainly remember the 1966 failure of the grid. There was one after that, and I forget what year it was. It wasn't all that long ago, but interestingly enough, it spread throughout the mid-central U.S., but it stopped at ISO New England. We were unaffected because their systems were so well structured that we weren't impacted while the rest of the middle Central America was. That was interesting to me.
That was the 66 one. That was the 86, I think.
86 of my, I know it was much more recently, but because of ISO structure, it just stopped. I would also maybe add one more thing to physical attacks and cyber attacks, and that's natural phenomenon. And the one that sticks most in my mind is a mass coronal discharge. And the last one we had was 1885, when we had telegraph lines stretched across the United States. They were uninsulated, and they were about a quarter of an inch apart from each other. And when that MCD happened, it sparked fires all across the United States because sparks were occurring between the conductors, which again were a quarter of an inch apart. Now they're microns apart. And I'm wondering what happens if we have another MCD. I think a lot of handhelds, a lot of the smaller components are going to just fail from an MCD. So I think that's a real problem.
Mike, what's an MTV? Sorry, you're
MCD, mass coronal discharge. That's when
Oh.
that's when the sun flares a massive amount of material, and it happens all the time. I mean, it's perpetually happening. It's just when it's directly facing the Earth, when it expels, I think they're gamma rays, but I'm not sure if that's limited.
No,
at the Earth,
no,
then we have a problem.
yeah, they're largely charged particles, protons, electrons, and so forth, and basically that creates an ion storm essentially. In Quebec actually suffered that, and their main problem was that they had basically a huge loop of several thousand miles.
Yeah.
And that took down the Quebec grid.
Yeah.
Just
all right.
just
Let's take a couple more questions, then we'll let Walter.
We got to move on there. But go ahead, Vincent.
Let's see, Vincent. I think you were next, and then Neil, and then we'll get back to Walter.
Okay. Cool.
Yes. Hi. Good morning. There's a couple of I think philosophical insights which we take for granted that we're an open society. And as an open society, we're now actually open to the world when we only thought of ourselves as open to ourselves, the United States. That's crucial. Separating out distributed localized systems is important to essentially creating electronic boundaries that will protect our systems. That's crucial. One other thing is an insight that was discovered along the way is India actually having a massive electrical system and industrializing further handles the electrical system a little bit differently, and we're consulting with them. Electricity can just as easily be thought of as a flow, similar to water, though it is different, and managing that flow is also an indicator if there is problems developing. And it turns out India has just a few more people managing and watching the electrical flow, and its variation has been able to stabilize it. And the U.S. learning from that has actually reduced blackouts and brownouts even when we have demands on our system. So there's a couple of insights that developed over time worth thinking about, the interaction between open society and the need to protect individual systems.
Good point.
Yeah,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Neil. Sorry, you were
I worked the last I don't know 7 years at for Boston for the Air Force indirectly with Boston College, and what they were designed to do was they call it space weather. Basically, they would, how can you forecast when there's a major solar storm, or what are the effects a solar would have on satellites and also the electric grid. And basically we have in some of the lectures they were saying that if it's really a big one, we got troubles.
Yeah, one thing about what NASA has done now is because of solar observation platforms that they have up there, you probably have a few minutes. What's happening is that you actually visually see the coronal discharge, but after it comes all the protons, electrons, and God knows what that's going to kill your systems on Earth. So you've probably got just a few minutes in which to basically shut everything down. And I don't think we're prepared for that. As far as I can understand it, I've not heard of anyone saying, all right, there's an off switch that we can just pull and bring the whole grid down and wait until this whole storm has passed. Yeah, that might last, though, several hours. That's the problem with coronal discharges.
Yeah.
Yeah, the group who actually is aware, and this is actually what Boston College is tied into, with the Space Weather Center, are folks who actually operate satellites. They're extremely vulnerable to proton events So if you have a satellite in space and it gets whacked with protons, you have a dead satellite soon after. So you have to react quickly, and you have to have pretty good warning. And on another note, there is now new science coming out that sort of that Carrington event in the 1860s was big, but historically now they've seen records where they've been an order of magnitude bigger in the last up to like 10,000 years. So something else that's on your list, but it's a rare event, big consequence.
Yeah.
Something else to worry about. The other thing Ron brought up the other day to me is, I mean, not only extraterrestrial attacks, but also weather attacks, meaning hurricanes and snowstorms, and that'll take out your power maybe on your street, but also maybe in your whole area. So that's also it's something I don't have on this
Well, I
graph here,
think,
but
Walter, I think the important point of what you're showing here is that, when we can't do much about nature, frankly. I mean, nature is going to, if there are hurricanes or sun blast and so on, that's something that's not under our control. But the bigger, and they may be consequential, but the kinds of things that are known in our society today to be troublesome are cyber attacks of various kinds and the possibility of physical attacks. We see that in I'm not talking only about energy. I'm talking about the generality of the potential for those kinds of mischievous and people who want to get become troublesome can take those actions. So I think from a security point of view, we can't deal with nature. You have to think about how we deal with the people who live on the planet. Go ahead, Walter. I'm sorry, I don't know. I philosophize too much.
So
Go ahead.
the other thing that affects reliability, though, is availability. Meaning we got to have the generation available to meet the demand. So that's what we're going to largely discuss in the next 15 minutes or so.
I know. I'm sorry. I know from my reliability background. When I talk about availability, I'm really talking about uptime over total time. That's kind of the fundamental measure. And reliability is really the rate at which you have failures. So it's on something different now when you apply it to the grid.
Yeah, I mean, because if you don't meet demand, you're not going to be reliable. I mean, you're going to have to shed load. So,
you're talking about availability of supply.
Yeah. So, in regards to availability, so availability equals capacity less the load or demand. And first of all, the capacity depends upon several things. One is time of the day and the season. Of course, the solar produces all of its electricity during the day and less electricity in the winter. So, but also what has to be looked at is the cost to produce electricity. So when ISO does their calculations, they got a whole bank of PhDs doing these calculations. So they're looking to reduce their cost, but they're also looking to reduce the environmental cost. So they have an obligation to take all the solar that's available. And so I don't know what cost. We'd have to ask ISO and how that all works. But now the demand also depends upon the time of day and the time of the week and season. So that, of course, when we're at home at night, we're not using a whole lot of electricity. Our factories aren't running. Our buildings are largely dark. So the load is low, and we're going to take a look at that in a minute. But also the day of the week. We're not using as much electricity during Saturday and Sunday, but we're probably using more electricity right now. I believe ISO's peak is usually highest in the summer during the day, but also they experienced a very high peak during that very cold snap that we had. So, and John, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was, you made the statement or assertion that ISO is required to accept all the solar that is generated.
I believe that's the case,
Know
John.
that, does you actually have some, is that a definite fact?
No, it's not a definite fact. In fact, in California, it's not, because there's an excess of solar in California.
No, but I mean, as far as I know, there is nothing in the, the mission statement or anything like that controlling ISO that says if there's, if you have solar and you have gas, you have to choose solar before gas. I didn't know that that's true. I hadn't heard that.
I tell you that what, well, that's a good question to ask Chris Niddle.
Yes.
Because his expertise is in cost of production and
But anyway, actually, it's probably a good question to ask Eric Johnson, which we could maybe just send him an email.
We could. There's no doubt. I mean, he knows what we're doing. In fact, I've invited him and his staff to join us if they wish. But I think, John, that's a very good point. If you could craft that craft a message, we can send it to him. You can send it to him and, copy Walter and myself or some, just so we have a community responding to him. I think that's a very good idea.
Okay. By the way, one other small point, which is just, as you said, there's a peak of electric demand at the coldest point in the winter, but there's a larger peak at the hottest point in the summer. But as time goes on, it's going to reverse, as in the largest peak is going to be in the winter, because as we all convert to heat pumps to heat our houses, we're going to be heating house electrically rather than burning gas. Where the peak is higher, and that, by the way, is going to be a bigger problem than the summer, because in the summer, when you have the highest demand, you also have the highest solar generation rate and so forth.
Yeah.
In the winter, you have like the lowest at the highest peak. So
Interesting.
That's right. As people switch to heat pumps from burning either oil or natural gas, it's going to shift the load. In fact, we're going to see a graph here in a minute where the largest peak that the ISO experienced was actually in February of this past year. So, all right. So actually, let me bring that up. Can you all see that what I have up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is ISO New England's web page. You can go to this at any time.
Wait a minute, Walter. What we see,
we've still got the old slide.
yeah, we see availability. We don't see a new.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the minimum.
Okay.
We see a link at the bottom of that slide.
Yeah, that's the link that I oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you, okay.
You have to
Sorry.
share the browser, I guess, because if you clicked on that link, then it's
Must be.
Put the link in the chat.
The link in the chat.
ISO New England.
Oh,
ISONE.com.
I don't think it's actually what Walter's concerned about right now. But
I want to show that page.
oh, you do? Oh,
Yeah. And so there's a link in the chat.
no, they want you to go to the page on your browser, copy the link, put the link in the chat, and then we can all go to that same.
Oh, okay. No kidding. Okay. All right, good. So let's see. So I'll just type it in.
Yeah, you can just type it in, actually. HTTPS.
yeah, I'm sure we have that link from
/
Eric's talk as well. Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
All right. Can everyone click on that?
Yeah.
Okay. And does that get you to a page that shows you the current price?
Wait a minute.
See a
Yes,
map
the
of New
price
England?
map.
Yeah.
You got a price map?
Yeah, there's a price map.
You see that? Okay.
System demand.
Okay. So the area's in blue right now for New England. Okay. So that tells us that it's a pretty low cost of electricity being generated. And so so that's per megawatt hour. So you divide by 1,000 and you'll get 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour generation cost. So yeah, that's pretty darn cheap. But if you look over to the right where it says system demand, you'll see that the demand is way down right now. All right. And the reason we're going to get into that in a minute, why demand is way down right now. Under the resource mix, you'll see that circle there in blue, that's natural gas. And that's about all the fossil fuels we're burning right now. You can see right now, it looks like all the nuclear plants are running and supplying 34%, and that's relatively cheap electricity. Under renewables, you see what they have there. They have of that 16%, 26% is solar and 41% is wind. So their goal, of course, is to grow that wind to a lot more. Surprisingly enough, they consider refuse burning and wood burning to be renewable as well. And landfill gas, you've probably seen landfills that have piping, and that piping is being burned to generate electricity. So coming back over to the system demand, you can see today is really a low day. That's going to be, I don't know, about 13.5 thousand megawatts capacity. But you see where that dip is. So that before solar was around, that curve would go up and peak. All right. So and the difference is what's called behind the meter solar. And that is in the order of 4 gigawatts, which is a huge amount of electricity. So let's see, if you could go down on your screen a little bit more, please, where it says more real-time data. All right. And you see that system load graph, it's on the left-hand side there. And there's a little yellow square at the bottom of that graph. If you click on that, that shows you the solar production. All right. And that's called, now that's behind the meter. So for those of us who have solar panels, that is behind the meter. So that generation is behind the meter. It doesn't show up. So if you're running a building that has solar panels on it or a home, that's considered behind the meter. When you see those panels out in fields as you drive along the highway, maybe, that's not behind the meter. But you can see the solar is making a big contribution here of shaving off that peak. But what happens is the peak then moves towards the evening, at hour 1800. So that peak is when people are home cooking, or they're turning on the heat, the TVs, and so that curve is so we need to learn how to shave that curve so that because that's the most expensive time of electricity.
Walter, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Solar power roughly is like 14% efficient because snowy days, sunny days, and so when they use that number behind the meter, they take into account that it's something less than 100%. I mean, they say it's 14% efficient.
Okay. So I'm not sure what you mean by efficiency, because solar panels are actually about 20% efficient. But on the other hand, yes, they do get covered with snow and whatnot. So maybe a capacity factor in there.
Well, I use 14 because the article I read. I mean, that what it is. It's somewhat less than 100%, quite a bit less than 100% of power, because you have snow, rain, cloudy days, and what have you. So whether it's 14 to 20%, my point is when they use that number there, are they factoring that? Do they take into account that they're not always going to have that number available?
Right. I see the question. So what that graph shows is real time. So real time behind the meter in this case is about 4 gigawatts or 4,000 megawatts of electricity in real time. And so plus there's more solar being generated in front of the meter as well. So it's a large contribution, but of course, it's not making any contribution in the evening or night. So solar is actually really doing a good job of shaving off our peak and shifting the peak to the evening hours.
Walter,
Yeah.
could you explain the graph called reserve prices graph?
No, so actually, I'm not familiar with that particular graph. I've tried to figure it out. So I'm not sure what the reserve prices are. It might have something to do with rolling reserve. Maybe somebody else knows that answer. But the hourly LMP graph that shows you what the price is at a particular hour. So if you see this morning, so the sun wasn't shining, but everybody's waking up, turning on their computers and turning on their lights, and factories are starting up again. The price peaked around 36.7. So it's 3.7 cents per kilowatt hour, which is still pretty cheap, you know.
I think reserve prices may have something to do with they have contracts. In other words, most of the prices are, 5 minutes from now we need some power. Who will bid to give it to us for the lowest price. I think reserve prices is where they say in advance, a day from now at this time we want to have a guarantee of amount of power. Who will bid to guarantee it? So we will pay you in advance this much money, so that we won't find out that we don't have enough people on, which seems to correlate with with the highest price and the peak of reserve. But anyway, that's not super important.
That's rolling reserve. Now, actually, John, you had a question about what the peak is. Summer peak.
Oh yeah,
winter peak.
Yeah.
So I invite you all to on the upper left graph, which is system load graph. It says date. If you use the Wayback Machine and click on the date and in the calendar, bring it back to that frigid day that we all experienced, which was February 3rd, 2023. And you click apply, and you'll see that the peak was 20 gigawatts or 20,000 megawatts. And so John, as you pointed out, as everybody switches over to heat pumps, that's going to get worse. So the load is really going to grow, especially in the winter. So I'm thinking, what is the wisdom of cutting everyone's gas off? So I have a concern about that. On the other hand, we know that about half of our electricity is generated by fossil fuels. And so that when we're using electricity to heat our homes, only half of that is being creating CO2. So there is an advantage to that. On the other hand, we got to make sure that the going forward that there's sufficient supply.
Right.
Yeah.
By the way,
let me make a suggestion. It's nearly 11:30, and you have 7 more slides. Let's go into the next slide.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. So going forward, and you all can see the screen now, right? It says generation losses and gains, right?
Yeah.
There's hardly any coal or oil burned in New England right now.
Oh.
And just a little bit available for rolling reserve. All right. And natural gas, as we just discussed, supplies us about 50% of our electricity, or about 8 gigawatts, or 8,000 megawatts. But
Hmm.
that Mystic plant down over by the Encore casino in Everett, that is, we're going to lose that. It's between 1,800 and 2,000 megawatts. And that is going to go offline July 1st.
That's natural
And
gas.
yeah,
That's
it's natural gas.
gas.
And the reason it's going offline is because during the winter, its source of gas is liquefied natural
Okay,
gas,
yeah.
which is very expensive. And we've probably all seen the big tankers come in. Those tankers had been coming in from Yemen and Russia. And of course, we don't have that as a source right now. And whereas the U.S. is building or supplying liquefied natural gas to Europe on foreign carriers. So the problem is for this power plant is that they could not get natural gas, liquefied natural gas from a U.S. port to another U.S. port because those ships are not U.S. flagged ships. They
The
weren't
Jones
built in
Act.
the U.S.
The Jones Act, right?
The Jones Act is right. And the Biden administration refuses to make that exception. So meanwhile, we can't get liquefied natural gas. And at the same time, the Massachusetts legislature refuses to build another pipeline coming across the state for natural gas, not liquefied natural gas, of course, but natural gas. So we're going to lose that generation capacity. And the and then we have nuclear, and there's currently 3 operating plants for nuclear. Seabrook is still running at 1,200 megawatts. Millstone in Connecticut and Millstone in Connecticut. So they are both licensed, thank God, to 2035, 2045, 2050. So so we have them to get us through the transition period. And so the transition period is our future generation. Hydro-Quebec, it looks like that's going to go through. And as you may have heard in the news a couple of years ago, there was a Maine referendum that stopped the clear cutting of the forest there, and that whole project was stopped. But that referendum was largely supplied by the utilities in that area. So, but it looks like the court has ordered that that's a go. It just has the PUC, the Massachusetts PUC, has to approve a cost increase because costs, of course, gone up. So, but that's probably going to go in 2025. We'll have that Hydro-Quebec, and that's going to replace a lot of the electricity that we're losing from the Mystic plant. The main wind is way up in Aroostook County. This looks like they've got 600 megawatts approved right now. They're looking for another 600 megawatts. And yet that's got to have its own transmission line down to Massachusetts. Vineyard Wind, you probably know about Vineyard Wind. And Ron, I'm hoping that we get a speaker from Vineyard Wind to talk about the project there.
Yeah.
Well, you've probably heard in the news there is about 6 units that are going to go online before the end of the year. They are both 13 megawatts each. There's going to be a total of 62 of these wind turbines. To give you an idea of the size of them, they're the largest in the world. I think China has some bigger. They are about 700 feet tall, and their vanes are about another 300 feet. So these are huge machines. They're spaced about a mile apart, about 15 miles off the vineyard.
Walter, let me ask a question though. You have 800 megawatts for Vineyard Wind in 2024. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
They only have 6 of 80 of facility windmills operational at this point. Are they going to have all the rest of them done in 2024?
Yep, that is the plan. By the end of 2024,
Okay, I
they're
didn't
going to have
realize that. That's pretty amazing.
all operational.
But there is something interesting. The other group, and I just don't have their name, but they have a offshore wind south of Vineyard Wind along New Jersey, and they have some plants out in California. They've invested $2 billion in those, but they've now shut that down entirely because they've already lost $2 billion. The problem is supply chain. They can't get the ships that are required in order to raise these immense towers because all these ships are being used in Europe right now where they've been doing offshore wind for years. So we're newcomers and there's no supply of ships for us. So that group shut down their project completely. So I'm praying that Vineyard Wind continues, but
No, certainly, Mike. Vineyard Wind is going to finish by 2024. There's no doubt about that. But on the other hand, the other 2 and 3 projects that have now been at least postponed, those who knows when. That's why I say other wind (2028). But there's 2 more projects for 800 megawatts that are planned. They were approved, and they reneged on their contract and had to pay, I think, $50 million to the state.
You know, this is an interesting slide, Walter, in the sense that we have 2 speakers coming up. Chris Niddle, who's interested in cost, and Michael Barrett, who's a policymaker. And I wonder whether, I think before you can generate useful policy, you have to have some sort of understanding of what technology has merit. And to me, the question of merit is associated with risk-benefit analysis. So has there been an authoritative risk-benefit analysis on, for example, solar and battery and wind as an energy source going forward? Has somebody done that? I mean, if you're going to choose between solar, wind, and batteries, what are the trade-offs? What is the risk benefit of using any one of those as a major supplier? Has anyone done that? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. Tom, is that your area of expertise?
No.
Risk benefit, or Eddie?
No.
Maybe it was Eddie.
That's a question that I think is worth
me.
asking to the guys who are going to be, to Chris, for example. Chris is very concerned about costs. But I think before you can really play that out, you've got to have some sense of what the trade-offs are. What is the benefit of making a commitment to, for example, the wind, and what are the risks and what are the benefits? And if the risks outweigh the benefits, then you might want to think differently. And I just don't know. I mean, for a policymaker, that would seem to me to be an important question.
So I'm not sure what risk you're referring to.
Well, I mean, any one of the anything that's an alternative to fossil fuels, whether it's wind or solar or battery or hydro, there ought to be some sort of risk-benefit analysis that compares the risks and benefits of wind, electric generation, or solar to fossil.
Actually, I'm more concerned with 2 aspects which relate to reliability, which is single points of failure and common mode failure. So when I look at wind, and you're looking at, say, 800 megawatt generation, which is now stationed way offshore, how is that power then brought to shore? Is it through a single cable, which is vulnerable to physical attack? For example, we're seeing in Europe now pipelines apparently coming under attack potentially by Russia. So that's one of the things. I was also just taking a look at the whole cyber issue, which deals with, which actually depends on 2 specific protocols of communication among devices, which are the IEEE and an international protocol, which means that everyone knows how those things work, which may imply that if you could somehow infiltrate that system, you now know exactly how those devices can communicate. So, you know, I'm looking at this and I'm asking the question really, what are the what analysis has been done in essence about those potential failure modes, and what do we do in terms of security, and what does that do to up the costs? Because everything you do essentially is to protect your sources become you know, a part of the cost equation.
So that it sounds like a question for Chris Niddle. I just looked at the clock. We probably want to move on a little bit.
Well,
Unless
can
someone's
we,
got a
can we just
pressing.
take, if we have three hands up, and I don't want to ignore
ahead.
them.
Yep.
Can we just take Tom and Vincent and Neil?
Tom, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a conundrum here. Looking at these two charts, you know, the ISO chart, you know, we were looking at before, and this one. So when you talk about reliability, you have to have a system that meets peak demand. So we just had a February that had what, 20 gigawatts of demand one day. So you actually have to build your system for that day at least with margin now, right?
Right.
And then now in this your generations, losses, and gains chart, we're losing 1,800 megawatts in 2024. And the only thing that you have listed there that's going to come in is Vineyard Wind, and we're still, you know, a gigawatt short.
Right.
And so that's a losing situation already. So how are we
Tom,
going
that's
to
my
meet peak demand, and then also sort of, you know, phase out capabilities, and, you know, wind, I'm not quite sure about the availability of wind. Is it 24 hours? Solar clearly is not. So that's a challenge, I think, that comes up, and I think that's a big challenge because these two charts
Tom.
exactly show a hole.
So I don't know what the capacity factor is for offshore wind, but it's certainly not 100%.
Yeah,
and 100% is 800 megawatts, and so
it is. Okay.
It is not 100%.
Yeah.
So the in fact that's the essence of my concern here, and that's why I wanted to talk about this, is that 20 gigawatt peak in February. How do you meet that if you lose Mystic at 1800? And so how is that going to be met? And so yes, Tom, that's the essence of the question.
And I think there's another part that maybe, is related to, this issue of, pipelines and where you locate these things. If you lose Mystic, you take that offline, then you don't actually have a backup capability. You don't have any reserve power from that. So if you did have a natural gas line to it, and you could use this as reserve power for peaking. Right. And so if you take it away, now you've also lost peaking power in your system.
That's right.
So that's pretty dramatic, I think.
Yeah. So right. So that's the right question to ask somebody. I'm not sure. I think maybe Michael Barrett.
That's what I would.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
That's a good question. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that is so Tom, you hit on the exact essence of the question, and Vincent, you might have an answer for us. Vincent, you there?
Yes. One of the other things that occurs to me, because of course there are many different innovations that happen. Many years ago, in fact, there was a successful solar auto race across the nation, mediated by clouds and storms, of course. But let's suppose that solar panels on cars become more common in 5 or 10 years. That means the amount of charging mounting from stations would be less. And how does that affect the demand and the incremental supply? One other thing, of course, is that though February has less solar, that's the highest point of cost for fuel or energy as well. So there is some incremental factor in all of this. Just curious if, in fact, you had more solar distributed in individual units, how does that affect the need or supply demand issue?
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. And one thing that Bob Deering brought up, okay, so what about snow? And so my solar panels get covered with snow for a couple of weeks each year and they generate nothing. So what if all your panels are covered with snow on the coldest day of the year and you lose most of your solar? So yeah, so maybe that goes to your question, Ron, risk analysis. Okay, what if you lose your solar because of a snowstorm? So, but I wonder if we could move on to the next slide if we could. So the demand growth, as we talked about, is going to be largely driven by electric vehicles and heat pumps, and I'm guilty of both. So we have an electric vehicle. We've had one for 3 or 4 years now, and so I charge it at night usually, and at night is the lowest cost of electricity because it's mostly nuclear. If it's sunny out, I'll actually charge it at home during the day. But but you run your heat pump the most at night, and so that becomes the question that Tom was bringing up. Okay, you got a really cold night. Everyone's using the heat pumps. How are you going to make up for that loss? And so yeah, go ahead. Yep. Oh, okay. And then so that's a conundrum that we have both in the short term and the long term. So let's talk about possible solutions. Possible solutions. We could increase generation using natural gas, and Tom, you brought that up, using that 1,800 megawatts as a peaker. By the way, that 1,800 megawatts over there, that's what they call the combined cycle over there. So they burn natural gas in a gas turbine. And of course, our founder, Dave Wilson, used to be he was an expert in that area. But they use the exhaust gas to run a steam turbine, so you get greater efficiency. You get efficiency around 60% generation. Or you could do battery storage. You could set up some battery storage units. But from my research, all I could come up with is it looks like there's only about 300 megawatts being proposed. I'm not sure how we're going to meet that. But on the other hand, if a lot of people have batteries in their homes, whether or not they have solar panels, that could, and that is the policy that the Green Mountain Power in Vermont just implemented this past week, so that there's more battery storage and it's more local. So that's another possibility. All right, more hydro from Quebec. We've got 1,800 coming from Quebec, and I think there's more capacity. And we can have local photovoltaics in our homes or businesses with the batteries, or we can use time reuse metering. And what that means is that electricity is going to cost more during peak times, with the hope that people will shave off their demand, like not run their clothes dryer or their factories during peak demand. But here's an idea that I'd like to pursue in the future is parking lot photovoltaics, where we've got these large parking lots that get covered with snow and everything. It'd be great to have solar panels there, like they do at the Stoneham Zoo, believe it or not. And so if we have parking, and that'll reduce. There's a lot of benefits to that, meaning your cars don't heat up with the sun, you generate electricity, and maybe you can charge your car at the same time. And then this is a question for Charlie Price. How about solar panels on the Jenks Center? I mean, you look at that beautiful roof they have there, and it's mostly bathed in sun. Charlie, any chance of us getting
well, we have talked about putting solar on the roof, but first thing we need to do is replace the roof. You're not going to put solar on a 30-year-old roof. So it's a big, expensive project for a small nonprofit organization. As you know, Jenks is not a publicly supported organization. It's funded by private donation money. And we have enough to keep running. But as we look down the road to going solar and things like that, it costs a lot of money to do that they don't really have. Now, solar, I guess you can, there are ways to put solar up with other people spinning off the cost, but you got to put a new roof in the building first. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of local financial issues that we need to resolve before we go too far down that road. But it is a topic of discussion on a regular basis.
If that 30-year-old roof, you're going to have to replace it anyhow, right?
Yeah, we do. And when we replace the roof, we'll probably go solar at the same time, but it's not in the budget for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So
How can that be addressed? Expedited.
Well, the question is, when do you put a new roof on? And
Actually, it's a question for Vincent in a way, because I mean, Jenks is only one building, but one structure. But if there was a provincial program that assists people who are changing
please don't call us again.
roofs,
Okay, thank you.
there are, I mean, we had to replace our roof as well. It would have been nice to have had some assistance, say, to put solar on at the same time. So are there
there is a point here that people have sort of overlooked. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts had a fairly extensive solar credit program, and part of that was allowed to expire. And I'm hoping Senator Barrett might address that because vigorous Commonwealth of Massachusetts tax credits do help these kinds of issues. And it'd be a lot cheaper to give tax credits for people to do stuff and stimulate the business than kind of wait around for larger plants and other kinds of issues. In this case, small as local is probably the best way to go, and encouraging people to do it. Every time there's been a tax credit in terms of insulation and savings, it did lead to savings, and it led to a lot of local business and people doing some retrofitting of their houses. So that's the tax credits by the Commonwealth is certainly an important thing.
Yeah, there's also the whole issue of efficiency.
Yeah, and so it used to be that nonprofits couldn't get the investment tax credit because nonprofits don't pay taxes. On the other hand, from the IRA that was recently passed by Congress, there is a rebate of 30% for nonprofits. So the solar panels. Charlie, when was last looked at for solar panels? That was probably about 5 years ago.
I think a little bit more than that, but you're right. Several years ago, we looked at it, and it just didn't make economic sense for a small nonprofit facility. So
the solar panels have come way down in price since then. Number one, batteries have come way down in price. Number two, and the federal government is willing to give or pay for 30% of the solar panels. So I'd like to see the Jenks Center or maybe other town buildings put their money where their mouth is and support reducing our load and providing battery backup. And
I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you, Walter. It happens that the Jenks is in the process now of a strategic planning exercise, and I'm part of it. I will bring this forward to the group that has been set up, and Charlie, we may need to get you involved in that strategic planning discussion as well. But I think the point is an important one, and it's worth thinking about at this stage. It's a strategic plan, so where will we be in 5 years? Let's think about this. But I want to come back to one issue that I brought up earlier, and I stuck on risk benefit. You know, I'm looking at all of the interest in batteries, and there's a huge interest. And we've heard from Yet-Ming Chang about battery technology probably a year and a half ago with Form Energy. And it's beginning to take real form. Form is taking form. But I wonder about batteries and the space they're going to take up, and they're going to have to be charged somehow.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that why not think about the risk benefits of batteries on the one hand, storage of electricity versus standby generators that are, for example, driven by biomass. And I think we have among our members Michael, who is very much involved in biomass conversion. Michael, can you envision something like a secondary generator or a backup generator that could be replaced a conventional gas-driven generators that people have in their home around their homes? Is that feasible, or am I off in some different planet?
Well, I guess I always look at this in terms of my own technology. So my technology can convert any form of biomass, waste streams. I'm really interested in seaweed and wood, waste wood. This is what's feeding the forest fires. All of that can be converted directly. Well, it can be converted into oils that we can use to generate electricity and also gas. So each system could generate a significant amount of electricity. I did speak to Jim Lavelle out here in Holyoke. Their Holyoke has an 84% carbon-free electrical system out here. His dilemma is, with increase in demand, electrical vehicles, marijuana growers, etc., how can he keep that 84% up without having to go to gas? And basically, he said, we'll buy all you can produce if you want to set up systems to build to produce electricity for us, but you have to meet the RPS standards as well. In order,
but Michael, is it even conceivable though that you could have something like a biomass converter associated with an individual house that would provide sufficient energy to be meaningful, or am I?
No, it's theoretically, technologically, it's feasible at this point in time. I think it's more important to feed the grid or produce microgrids where we may have 100 homes on a particular grid. So essentially, it's the same as solar or wind, except that we're using biomass and waste streams to generate the electricity.
So,
and it's
so it's not exactly the
24/7.
same. Yeah, it's not exactly the same because biomass still generates CO2.
Yeah.
And
No,
so
we sequester CO2, Walter. I can sequester more CO2 with my system in 4 or 5 hours than a tree can in its entire lifetime. So we're producing energy while also sequestering CO2. It's carbon negative electricity is what it is.
Let's go to Tom. I'm watching the time, Walter, but let's go to Tom.
Yeah, I just have one, on this particular chart, one other comment. So I think when you look at the possible solutions, you really probably need to look at it not just on the ISO New England view, but nationally. Okay, there's a lot more sun, down in the Southwest, and so you have a lot of solar potential that right now is underutilized. Problem is we live, thousands of miles away. So now the problem becomes, what's the national distribution grid look like that could support sort of an equitable distribution of energy across the entire country? So that's a federal problem, and that's probably an unmanageable one, federally. But that's something else we should look at here, or put on possible solutions. A national solution for equitable distribution of where the resources are. We have the wind offshore, they have the sun in the Southwest. How do you balance it out across the country?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a question for maybe Chris Niddle because of the cost of transport. So you could move large amounts of electricity, but I think when you look at, let's say, Florida, you mentioned Florida, they generate about 10% of their electricity with solar, only 10%, and they still generate about 50% of electricity with natural gas. So here in Massachusetts, we generate about 9% of our electricity from solar. So we almost have the same profile. So although there's more sun down in Florida, there's not the incentive to put in more solar generation.
But that's why it should be a national problem, right? With national incentives and a national approach. If the states aren't going to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Sure. Yeah. Al, go ahead.
You're muted.
You're muted, Al.
On the issue of putting batteries in all houses for storage, these are lithium-ion batteries, and there is the issue of fire, which really hasn't been resolved even in cars. So one should think about that before promoting this technology too much.
Yeah. So I have a battery at my house as well. And when I say at my house, it's outside the house for that reason. I was considering putting in the basement. I don't have a garage. But because lithium ion batteries are flammable, very flammable, we've got it outside. So that helps a little bit. Now the newer batteries that are, I don't think Tesla has converted over yet, but some of their batteries are, sure, are lithium iron, IRON phosphate. And those are less susceptible to fire.
Yeah.
They're heavier, but for land-based use, it's great. And actually, some of the the Tesla vehicles are using LFP, and many of the other manufacturers are moving to LFP because they are a safer technology. So, yeah.
Let's take one more question. We have Albert's hand up, and then Walter, as sensitive to time, we're just about out of time. But Albert, go ahead.
Well, actually, I spoke already. And Walter, I commend you for the fact that you have the batteries outside. And actually, an extra precaution is to have it not attached to the house, just in case there's an issue.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Al.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I just want to make the general observation that Walter, this has done exactly what I think we all hoped it would do. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I think we've come up with a number of issues that we want to bring forward to people like Chris Niddle, who's interested in costs, to Michael Barrett, whose function as a policymaker is to determine what directions we should be heading. And as technologists, I think we have to feed Michael the kind of information on such issues as risk-benefit analysis that they're going to need, we being a technological community. So I just think this has been a fantastic conversation. And I want to thank you, Walter, for taking the time and initiative to put all this together. I know we're with only 6 slides, you'd think, all right, I'll be done with them in 20 minutes, right? But the conversation has been great today. So I want to thank everybody for being a part of this. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I've enjoyed it. I hope everyone else has. And Walter, I'll give you the very last word today.
Yeah. So thank you for everyone participating. And I wanted this to be a discussion of what are we going to do, and so there's really some really good points brought up by Bob and Tom and Charlie. So I think that's great. Now, in the email that Ron sent out, there's a couple of links there you may want to watch in regards to there's a couple of YouTube videos and a link to ISO New England and a few other places. So you may want to take another look at that email from Ron and do a little bit more research in preparation for the meetings coming forward.
You know, I do have one final comment. I've been reading the chat as we've been having our conversation, and Drew, you have sent us a whole host of really interesting comments. Could you send me an email message so that you and I could talk a little bit, and then we'll figure out how to respond to many of your comments? But I don't know if anyone else has been following the chat. We've had a very intense conversation here, but the chat's got a lot of interesting stuff. So Drew, would you get in touch with me, because I'd like to follow up on some of your comments. Other than that, I think we've done it, guys. This has been a wonderful day. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this, and we'll meet again in 2 weeks when we will have HEAT, Home Energy Efficiency Team, as our guest. Thanks, everybody.